Well, thanks for tuning in to the Maverick River Podcast, Conversations in the Wild. I'm thrilled about today's episode with Dr. Andy Garrett, a friend of mine who has been a clinical psychologist for years and years and years. And he is an incredible man full of wisdom and all sorts of tools to really help people understand their true north identity. When we understand who we are, we begin to thrive. And Andy has a practice in Newport Beach where he does therapy, counseling, and life coaching, helping people understand who they are so that they can get into the best possible state and really live out their God-given purposes and become a better man, become a better woman, become better kids, and a better family unit. Andy is a gifted individual, and I'm really thrilled to have him on the podcast. I believe that he is helping hundreds and hundreds of people through the different things that he offers. So take a look and enjoy this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. All right, well, welcome to Conversations in the Wild. This is Tim and Justin. We're really excited to be back with you today, and we have my friend, Dr. Andy Garrett. He is a legend and an incredible man that attends the church where Justin and I get to pastor at, and he is full of wisdom and knowledge and helps a tremendous amount of people, but has some specifics as is to men, which is why we wanted to have him on. So, Andy, thanks for being here.
Yeah, excited to be here. That's quite an introduction. So I got to kind of level up here.
Well, yeah, you do definitely have to level up.
Tim takes introductions very seriously. He likes good introductions.
You're on a podcast with Justin Herman and Tim Lukai, so level up.
Yeah.
We're really humble too, which is great. So I wanted to have you on because you had me on your podcast a few weeks ago, True North podcast. Is that
True North Movement?
True North Movement with you and Eric Hurd.
And whoa, that's a pretty serious collection of people.
Yeah,
I know, especially Eric Hurd. I mean, we're all in his shadow,
Literally and figuratively.
But we had an incredible conversation, and we talked about having you on the Conversations in the Wild podcast. And some of the premise of the idea of Conversations in the Wild is it's not a natural thing for us guys to just be vulnerable, be honest, be authentic with our lives. We often tend to just like you said, level up and act like everything's going good and we're just fine. And one of the things that I've noticed working with men for the past 7 or 8 years is guys do need to open up. Guys do need to be real. And often as a result of them not is we're just carrying it all and holding it all. And that obviously isn't healthy and can cause some other issues. But when we're out in the wild is where I notice that we begin to get more authentic, real. And so when we're out doing stuff like camping or hiking around a bonfire is often where I see it. So this is Conversations in the Wild, and where I really wanted to focus, which I know is part of kind of the thing that you focus a lot about, is authenticity and identity within men. But before we even jump into that, I would love for you to give us a little bit of your story, your background, and how you ended up as Dr. Garrett. I mean, that's a big title.
It is. Appreciate that. So yeah, that story, it's interesting. Part of the influence that led to me becoming a psychologist was not a surprise, some of my own struggles. So having grown up, I often talk about having these two major influences in my life, these two men that had extremely different impact on me. One was my father, another one was my grandfather. So my dad, we have a good relationship now, but he got with my mom when they were both very young. They really should not have even been in the same room together, let alone be married together. And they just did not particularly get along well together, and they got divorced when I was 2. My father, the impact that he had on me, because he didn't know who he was, and his identity was so wrapped up in a series of relationships and needing affirmation from women, he just left a trail of damage everywhere he went, right? And as a young kid, I didn't know how to make sense of that. I just knew I wanted my dad around. And so I had this father wound that I was carrying around, and it had these host of emotions. I was filled with anger and rage and sadness and anxiety. And all that led to a high school experience that was pretty wild, to say the least, covering on that topic of in the wild. And so making a lot of really, really terrible decisions. My mom had me see a series of psychologists. I had a few that actually were able to make a connection. There was one guy in particular that had a completely atypical approach. He actually had us walk on fire, hot coals, took us out to a sweat lodge. And I don't know, right? He just was authentic, right? I mean, I think that was part of it. I mean, these certainly had some people that had fancy degrees and you could tell they were very intelligent, but I could sense right from the get-go, they didn't care about me. He just took the time to actually go play basketball with me. He would go do things like that and connect with me in a way that it allowed this guard that was up, very, was very defensive at that time in life. And so he kind of broke through that and allowed me to start to get real. So there's this one impact with my father, right? That, because of his lack of security and who he was, he created just, he's on his 7th marriage now. I think he finally got it right the 7th time. I know he did. And he's, I think, in a good place in his life. But that just left this wake of damage. And you have my grandfather, my mom's dad, who his name's Carl Karcher. So he started Carl's Jr., very successful businessman, but really his greatest success was who he was as a person, right? In the midst of growing, this massive hamburger chain, this fast food empire, he still made it home to dinner every night by 5:30. He was committed. He would talk about his core values constantly. We all knew what his core values were. I heard you guys had Travis Hunter. Thank you. On, and it was awesome. He talked about his father and how consistent his dad was.
Yeah.
Right. And when I heard that, I mean, that's something I know I strive for as a dad, but it's something I saw and experienced with my grandpa. When someone has that level of consistency, it creates trust, right? All of a sudden you just realize I don't have to worry. Is my grandpa going to have integrity, right? Is he going to come in and his emotions going to be constantly swinging? We never know what we're going to get. That breeds all kinds of anxiety and hypervigilance and things that make growth difficult. When I knew that my grandpa would show up consistently in the same way, loving on his family, right? Putting God first, it allowed me to let my guard down. And so he created this impact on me. It had this ripple effect that made me want to be better, right? When I was around him, it was one of the few places where I could stop putting on these series of masks of trying to impress people. I could just kind of figure out who I was. And so all that to say, eventually, as I went into school, I love psychology, English. I was a double major. I didn't really see a career path with English other than potentially teaching, which wasn't that exciting. And people always just naturally opened up to me, right? Even through high school, even as I was just a complete train wreck, people in the midst of, their train wreckness, they would just say, I've never told anyone this before. And so there was a sense that people felt safe with me. I think I've always been able to not judge people and just kind of refrain on that. But the pathway to identity and how I got there was really because of the influence of my grandpa. I realized that that's what he had figured out. He knew who he was, and he operated with such clarity and certainty with that. And that's what allowed him to have this incredible impact on me and thousands of other people.
Wow. That's amazing. I have a bunch of questions based off what you just said. Some are deeper, but we're going to start with the surfacey level questions.
All right.
Okay. Carl's Jr., Carl's Karcher is your grandfather.
I'm so happy that you said that because obviously I was thinking about that as well.
I mean, that's a big deal. And I gotta say, I'm curious at your favorite burger that Carl's Jr. Puts out. That's easy. Okay, go for it. And I'll tell you mine as well. Go ahead.
Double Western bacon cheeseburger.
That's it.
Can't say I get it very often at this point, right? But holy cow. Arguably one of the best burgers, and I think several fast food chains have tried to rip off the Western bacon.
No doubt. I feel like the double is really aggressive. I have done it and regretted it, but I would always in high school get the regular Western bacon cheeseburger, and it was the first and only burger at the time I knew put bacon and onion rings on a burger. Yeah. And then I went it one step further, and I always get a side of ranch and drizzle ranch all over that burger. And Carl's Jr. is an icon in my town of Woodbridge, which is in Irvine. And I spent a lot of time there as a kid. So that's awesome. Love that grandfather Carl was such a massive and kind of stood in the gaps of the father wounds that you did discuss. And the other thing I got to ask, still probably surface level, your therapist or counselor had you walk over hot coals.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Did he get arrested? Is he did he lose his certification? Like, what in the world?
Yeah, no. And in fact, we actually had a TV crew for the event that we were a part of. My mom, who's like one of the most non-risk taking people you could ever meet, actually joined me on this. And so it's really crazy. They get you like all worked up into this mental state, and then you go. Oddly enough, one of the coals actually stuck to the bottom of my feet.
Oh my gosh.
And so it burned my foot pretty bad, but pretty crazy. I mean, it was a pretty intense situation. I'm not sure if he's still practicing that or how that's going. But
So
we had Channel 9, I think, was there and recorded the whole event.
So that's not illegal to have a kid walk over burning hot coals.
I might have been an adult then.
Okay.
But definitely, like I said, atypical, right?
Yeah.
He definitely took a non-traditional approach.
I love that. And the other thing that you mentioned about him is that he was present. He was consistent. He'd hang out. He'd play basketball. He'd do things that you want to do. And that's very atypical of a counselor. It's usually you get your 50-minute session, work through the things, and then see you later. See you next week. So he went above and beyond. And so it sounds like God was with you and putting him in your pathway, as well as your grandfather, who really stepped in in such a time of need. And you kind of talked about your story of going down a path that your mom easily recognized was very destructive. So thank you for sharing some of that. Justin, did you have a question for Andy based off any of that crazy?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is, can we name drop you to get free stuff? Like if I walked into a Carl's Flea Market, I'd say, hey, I know this guy. I want a double bacon friggin' cheeseburger with onion rings.
I wish you could. I wish I could. At this point, it's had a couple of different owners since my grandpa. And to be honest with you, I couldn't even tell you who owns it right now. Now, several of my aunts and uncles do own pretty large franchises. So
okay, here we go. Where are those
go
franchises?
to one of those.
Okay.
Might be out in Arizona, actually. There might be some in that area.
Well, this is obviously wonderful. This is obviously wonderful news.
Yeah.
So are you a dad? I don't know if we address that. Yeah. Are you a dad?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
I got 2 kids.
So my question is, all those things you went through, that whole thing sounds wild to me, walking on coals. But on the other hand, so keep in mind, I've been to Africa. I have tons of friends in Africa where they have I mean, I don't even know how to say it, extremely intense rite of passage experiences for their tribe, for their people. So I'm wondering, have you brought any, like, what is your view on like rite of passage stuff? Like, have you brought any of like that kind of like extremeness into your fathering of these kids? Like, what does that whole thing look like? Because I'm sure that had an impact on you past just like, oh, I did this thing once. Yeah, I walked on coals, no big deal. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I remember reading the book Robert Bly, Iron John, that really goes into the loss of this rite of passage, right? And how men are really suffering because there's just this no clear distinction in kind of how that happens.
And to pitch that book, what's that book again?
Robert Bly, Iron John.
Yeah, we'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes because I'm familiar with that writing, and I completely agree with you when it comes to that. When it comes to culture today, manhood today, something was lost in there, and I agree with that point. So, but I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure that book is included. But keep going.
Yeah, there's obviously, I think on our podcast you mentioned John Eldridge, which Wild at Heart, amazing. So my son's 7, so he's not quite at the age, right, where I'm ready to go and take him out into the wild or have him walk on fire. But no, I absolutely believe it's important to have some type of process, right? Kind of this, entry into manhood. A lot of what I do with clients, I don't work a ton at this point with young adults or teens, but I did early in my practice. And I do a lot of core values work. And so while this isn't jumping on hot coals, helping young adults to be able to get really clear, define, right? Because we take on the values of our family, right? And of our culture as kids. And that's just kind of what sets our essentially our family true north. But as you get to be in adolescence, you start to reject those things, right? You start to then question, well, is this even what I believe? And kids don't have a healthy framework for doing that right now, right? So they're often then getting their values from social media. They're getting it from a variety of places that certainly aren't going to lead them to fulfillment. And so, I think the church ideally steps into that place. And I think when kids are involved in really great youth ministries and teen ministries, that's awesome. But I think as parents, like that's part, my kids have values vision boards already, right? They're 10 and 7. I hope that they don't resent me when they get older, but I think it's important to help them start to give a language to. These are the things that have a disproportionate amount of meaning and value. And then how do I live those out? Like, what do those things mean to me? Why are they important? We know there's identity models like James Fowler, who talked about faith identity, right? And he said that there's like a spectrum from immature to most mature. And he said that people that take on the values and beliefs of their culture, but they never question, it's like they swallow them whole and they become very rigid. So it's kind of an insecure belief system. And anybody that questions it, anybody that doesn't agree with it, tends to get this really harsh, rigid reaction to it. It's very intolerant. It's very, right? So he'd say the idea is to eventually get to a place where you start to have a clear understanding, right? I've taken the time to chew on what it is I believe. I know what that means. I know why. And then that creates this really healthy, secure sense of who you are, right? And if somebody questions your value system, if somebody doesn't have those beliefs, you become actually more tolerant, more loving, more accepting, but also more rooted and secure in exactly who you are and why. So I'm not sure if I answered on that, but I think
no, that's great.
Yeah.
I actually are going down a path that is actually interesting for me to hear because, I have 3 kids. Justin has 4 kids. My oldest is 11. We're getting closer into that rite of passage stuff that we were kind of referring to as it all started with you walking on coals, burnt foot. But you said I already have vision value boards, and your oldest is 7.
10
or 10,
Yeah.
10 and 7.
Yeah.
And so what does a vision value board look like for a 10 and 7-year-old?
I mean, it's like stick figures, right? It's got
Right.
some pictures. Some of it, when we got some old school magazines, right? Cut out pictures, but so they got a picture of, Jesus, and they, drawing pictures. They got family. My daughter, like kindness is really important to her. My son, like fun and play, adventure, right, is super important. And so there's just pictures. And ideally, if you can grab a picture of one of the family or of them actually engaged in something, right, that represents to them fun or adventure, like that's the best. We know psychologically, when you have something, a visual cue that constantly signals to you, like this is important, it engages a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. And basically that's what tells your subconscious what to pay attention to, right? So like people who think they're lucky, it's just that their reticular activating system is constantly telling them to look for opportunities to find luck.
Yeah.
And if you did that all day long, you'd find luck in all kinds of places. And so it can be really powerful. I've had executives, I've had entire businesses do values vision boards, and they've come back and said, initially, I thought this was like, a kid's arts and crafts project. And it was one of those powerful things I've ever done.
Wow. So is that part of you when you bring guys, and it's probably couples and families through the process, and we'll talk some of the process that I know that you do, but is that always one of the things you begin with of identifying what are my core values?
Yeah. Yep. For sure. So foundational, right, to all the follow-up work that we do. I feel like a lot of times people have core values, like whether they've given names to them or not.
Right.
And it's guiding them. I had someone just recently who was like, I just don't know what my values are. And I'm not going to basically go through this worksheet because it's causing me a lot of stress. So say, cool. So I just took time to really listen deeply to what it was that they got passionate about, right? What made them really upset. And they kept bringing up this concept of respect, right? How important respect, and you're not respecting me and all that. And I was like, sounds like respect is a core value of yours. The person started to tear up like in the office because they're like, yeah, like, when you know someone's values, it's intimate. Like you're knowing them at the deepest, most kind of core level of who they are.
Yeah, that's incredible. So in the process that you do, how early on in the process is it? Is it week 1 and 2?
Yeah, pretty.
I mean, it would seem like it.
Yeah.
Because everything would lead out of that, right?
Yep.
So since we keep talking about this process, why don't you share some of what you do, and as it pertains to identity, which was one of my things that I really wanted to talk about, because I think that is probably one of the key things that I think men, at its core, identity is what causes us to then go down different pathways of destruction or all sorts of pathways that are simply not healthy. It might not be destruction. It might be just the wrong prioritization of our life. And then with all those things comes marital issues, parenting issues, detachment, all the things. So share a little bit about the process that you do with.
Yeah, so it certainly does start with the core values. Sometimes before that, we do go and do, it's like called a family genogram, or just looking at like, what's the legacy that's been passed down to you, right? Let's look at a couple generations and what were some of the things that you experienced in your family. And then sometimes there's a need to let go, like before we can start to move into the present and the future. Like sometimes people need to be able to shed or let go of, like, this is where this part of my family legacy stops, right? And we're going to put an end to this. There's some really powerful exercises that we use, right, to do that. I don't do a ton of like Freudian digging into the past or needing to know. But I do think sometimes the narrative that we create around our past, if we feel like we were victims, right, and then we're carrying this forward, that becomes its own identity, right? So people then, and when you're able to shed that and start to then connect your identity to your values and some other things that we do, becomes extremely powerful. So start with that process of kind of looking at what you've inherited. Then we go through the value system. I love focusing on, strengths I think are great, but specifically character strengths. Like, and how do you want to apply those in virtuous, purposeful ways? We look at intrinsic motivation, like what motivates someone. Is it external motivation or intrinsic? I like to call intrinsic motivation Holy Spirit motivation. I'm not saying that's biblical or anything, but that's what we call it. And I don't know how much the listeners or we might be familiar with the difference between the two, but just a super quick version of it.
Please break it down.
External is just when you're doing something for the reward it produces, something outside of you, right? So you're motivated by money or power or social approval, right? So, and some of those things are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but when that's the primary motivator and you're out there working and let's say you make a bunch of money, you get a hit of dopamine, right? It makes you feel really good, but that dopamine wears off very quickly. So if there's not something more substantial, right, that you tie your sense of self-worth and value to, then you just need to keep going back to that well, right? And it's an endless cycle. It's essentially the addiction cycle, right? Where you just keep doing it and it's going to be increasingly, you need more and more to get the same hit of dopamine, and it's really unfulfilling. Intrinsic motivation is when you do something almost like it has to come out of you, right? It's like that simple act of learning or impacting someone or helping men to find, figure out who they are. Like it's its own reward. And if you happen to also get, paid well, or there's some external rewards, that's great. But the primary driver is the act of doing something that feels like this is what I was called to do. So I think kind of the idea of passion, there's a concept known as flow state. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
So in sports, it's what they call being in the zone, right?
Got it.
So flow state's just kind of the psychological term for that. Intrinsic motivation is necessary to consistently get into flow state. So it's one of the things I try and help people I work with. When you're operating at full authenticity, you should experience significantly more flow state where you're operating at your greatest potential. And yet it feels like, time just slows down and you can be more productive and yet have more bandwidth at the end of that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I usually refer to it just like in my lane,
right?
Like flow state is when I know I'm doing exactly what I was created and wired to do through my giftings and through spiritual gifting, as well as like things that just give me joy and are fulfilling me. Like, flow state. Not familiar, but definitely familiar. Not the term. That's cool. So what I should have asked a little bit more clearly. This process, does it have a name? Is this coaching? Is this a program you run?
Awesome. Yeah. So a program, we've run it as a group cohort, coaching a group of men through it. It's the True North Blueprint. Interestingly, I created the program and launched it on March 15th of 2019, which was when the entire state of California, right? Yep. So we had a beta group set to go through that. A few people are like, I'm out, right? I don't know what's going on here. But we had 18 people go through it. 14 of them completed the program. During what was arguably the most uncertain time, certainly my lifetime, because people were thriving. Yeah, right? It was because they had this foundation. It's like they knew how to make decisions even in the midst of this uncertainty. So we knew we had a process, right? And most of it was what I had learned from my grandpa, but just me reverse engineering and unpacking it psychological terms. Like he had an 8th grade graduation. He certainly wasn't using terms like intrinsic motivation or flow state, but that's what he was doing. Eric Hurd, the legend, right?
Yes.
That guy, half the time I meet with him, I'm like, did you just drink 4 Red Bulls? Like, his energy is off the charts. And, so I asked him one time, I was like, are you this way because you're doing mostly what you are intrinsically motivated to do? And he thought about it. He's like, yeah, 100%. Right. Like, I'm doing exactly what God called me to do.
He lives most of his life in flow state.
Yeah.
It's very
remarkable.
rare not to see
Yeah.
Eric in flow state. He is in the flow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's very true of Eric. So how often are you running these True North Blueprint cohorts?
So we're running once a quarter. I definitely have people individually that I take through that on a regular basis. And then we've really started leaning into doing corporate trainings, right? Coming in and working with groups and taking them through this process. Usually it's the leadership team that we're going through. And then as we realized, well, these people were getting these incredible results out of defining their true north and operating out of that. And it doesn't stop life from happening. And so they were still experiencing everything from, difficult diagnoses to hardships, setback, recession. And so we believed there was a need for resilience because people would get knocked off course and they weren't able to rebound quickly from that. And if they weren't consistently in the coaching program, right, all of a sudden they kind of reverted back to old bad habits or just making decisions out of emotions that kind of spiraled and got them stuck in vicious cycles. So we created the Radical Resilience Program, which is just, helps people to operate, and keep going back to their true north. But it teaches the principles of what resilience is. We call it radical. I know radical is a term that kind of can have a negative connotation, right? It means extreme. But radical really at its core, it means like the fundamental essence or core of something, right? So you're operating at resilience at the identity level. And so we believe businesses in particular, like in men, let me say that, like, men need resilience, I think now more than ever. And it's like one of the greatest things lacking that I see, right? I feel like men are getting beat down a lot. Then it's one of the most confusing times of what it means to be a healthy man or to step up. And I think resilience is something that if we can help them to understand what it is so they can access it quicker, that more men can operate as God intended.
Do you think guys I would assume most guys don't recognize where they're at. They're in a complacency state. They're burnout, exhausted, but they don't recognize, wow, resilience is something I strive for, but I do not have.
Yeah.
And as a result of 2020, 21 pandemic state, we experienced global trauma.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always accredit some of the baggage that we may still carry as a result of the pandemic we all experience. And I think there's a spectrum of some people were greatly affected and others are resilient through it.
Yeah.
It was hard on everyone. Other people slipped into some pretty dark places as a result of it. So I guess my question is, do you see often where men have no clue at the state that they're in?
Yes. Yeah. And for sure. And I think even when you use the term resilience, right? Like we try and differentiate between like white knuckle resilience, because there's a lot of old sayings about just, like be tough, walk it off, all these things where, yes, some guys are good at just being able to keep pushing through without actually stopping to identify that, like, hey, I'm really hurting, right? And my, hurtness is now bleeding into my marriage or my relationships. So they keep pushing forward, but I don't know, I guess you could question, are they really being resilient? Or are they just, right? They just kind of like white knuckling it.
Right. So when a guy has issues understanding who he is, his purpose, his identity, and this is part of your story, what have you seen most often as a default mechanism for men? Like, what is kind of this default survival rate? Like, where do they land often that you see?
We are, I think, a society, I don't know if this is, I think it's amplified in Southern California, but we are so attached to what we produce. Right. And I think that starts all the way in school where our grades become so important. Right. Yes. It's about, just needing to produce without recognition of whether or not we actually enjoy that, why learning is important. It's like you just get good grades and it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. And so I think we become very attached to just always trying to attach our identity to our status. I see a lot of times, at least with the men that I work with, where I'll have someone that is really amazing at their job, at what they do. They have clarity, right? It's like they know what they're good at. They know how to make really effective decisions in high pressure situations. They know the impact they want to have. They have all this clarity and certainty, but it does not translate at all over into any other area of life, right? And so they're operating at this high level, and they can't make even simple decisions at home effectively. They constantly are putting their foot in their mouth, right? I think of a friend of mine that was telling me how his wife was making him a beautiful dinner, a tepon dinner, and there was like rice on the counter, right? And he's like, internally, don't say anything, right? Don't say anything. But then it comes out, like, hey, this would be a lot nicer if you clean up this mess. Wow. One of those things, right? I mean, I think we can all recognize, and he recognized it.
Sure, the dinner was probably ruined at that point.
It was 100% ruined. But that's what happens, right? When all of a sudden it's like we're operating out of insecurity. I mean, that's something that we had talked a bit when you're on our podcast. The insecure man can create a whole lot of damage, especially when that insecurity becomes really rigid. Right? We protect our sense of identity, whether it's secure or not. We protect that, like with So if we believe that we're smart or that we're really good at something, and then someone attacks and starts to expose our weakness or vulnerabilities, like that tends to get very, very harsh reactions. So
yeah, we talked about that on your podcast. And one of the things I've recognized, that an insecure person, man or woman, it really doesn't matter, is one of the most dangerous and scary people to do anything with, so to speak. And it doesn't always manifest as anything scary or dangerous, but oftentimes in a workplace setting, in a group setting, that person will do, at least I've seen it primarily with men, they'll do whatever is necessary to make themselves feel better and get any sort of dopamine hit, any sort of confidence boost, identity boost, to belittle and sabotage people around them. And you probably see that often. I mean, that happens in the workplace very often. When you have an insecure leader, you then have an insecure team, and then you can have an insecure, fear-based culture in the workplace, which can be a very unhealthy culture to work in. And people generally don't want to work for you. And they're not happy in their job. So it truly can be a very dangerous, scary thing. So I imagine you've seen the same thing.
Yeah. The ripple effect, the kind of the downstream, as I think you covered well there, like your identity really sets the tone for everything. It sets your direction. So when that is off base, like everything that flows downstream from it, everything from the habits you choose, whether you choose them or not, the decisions you make, the relationships you choose. I think one of the things that you had initially had me come into Mariners and work with was in the singles group. Right. And a lot of that, I love that Mariners takes a little bit of a different approach, that it's not so much just about finding a partner, but it's about establishing your identity in Christ first, believing that when you do that, you're going to make healthier relationship decisions. That is 100% my experience, that when that becomes secure first, the decisions you make are so much better, and you save yourself so much time from having to clean up all this wreckage and damage. I know it's true for me. Like my dating history prior to actually using my values to guide who I dated was a wreck.
Right.
I mean, so
some of the things that you do with the True North Blueprint are not necessarily in a Christian forum. So you'll do a corporate workplace, you'll do perhaps one-on-one, you mentioned one-on-one coaching. That may or may not be someone who wants anything to do with any sort of Christian, biblical worldview. But when you do, and you and I both know, True North is Jesus. Obviously, I think that when you named it that, and hopefully you'll have the opportunity in those settings. But where have you seen the difference when you're coaching, say, a non-believer and a believer, when you can actually help a man or a woman understand their identity is first in Christ Jesus, versus your identity has to do with these core values? So how have you seen that play out differently?
It's so much more powerful. Interestingly, I've had quite a few people that I've worked with who started off, oftentimes they had some type of foundation of spirituality in their life. Oftentimes was someone in their life that had, was a poor representation of faith that kind of, led them off that path. But in going through the process of finding their true north, a good percentage of them actually end up reconnecting with their faith.
Mm.
So I just say that it's really one of the most gratifying things that I get to do without being overtly trying to guide them in that direction. They find it organically. But, when your values or your identity is attached to things that don't have, we use the term true north. I'll say this real quick, as opposed to magnetic north. Do you know the difference between the two?
I think you've shared it with
I think-
me, but
I think
share
I
with
have.
I think you did on a podcast, but I'd love for you to share it again.
So I didn't know this till even somewhat recently. And if you're like an avid hiker and you're hearing this, you're probably like, you might be getting frustrated with my response on this. But magnetic north is constantly reading the electromagnetic field of the environment. And so it almost rarely ever lines up with true north, which is a fixed location, right? I think a lot of people live their life in a similar way, is that they're constantly reading the environment. And so it might be in the boardroom, right? That you are a certain person, at home, in the bedroom, right? You're different with the guys and all these different, so it creates compartmentalization.
Yep.
And I think that's more likely to happen when you don't have a true north that's clearly anchored to Jesus.
Yep.
Right. Even if you're going through this process, right, we're trying to create a holistic sense of identity. So there's just consistency. And, while your values might manifest different at home than they do at work,
Sure.
they should still be the same set of values guiding you regardless of where you are.
No doubt.
So when Jesus is at the center of that, you just see, right? You see, I think, more humility, you see less of an ego, and a lot more of the identity gets anchored to, like, what is the service or impact I can have in the world, right? That makes a difference. That's beautiful, right? And that's really, it's my favorite thing to work with, not to say, yeah.
That's cool. I love the illustration of magnetic versus the true north, because I think we see so many people that are ultimately trying to do the right thing,
Yeah.
that are trying to have identities rooted with morally good things
Yeah.
and good values, but ultimate fulfillment comes in recognizing and surrendering to Jesus Christ.
Yep.
And so one of the things I was thinking about is it sounds simple as we talked about it. Oh, you're just understanding your identity is in Christ.
Right.
It's not that simple to go from head to the heart, though, and living out for the average guy that all of a sudden you're coaching. Hey, your identity is in Christ, not in growing that business that you're working so hard to do. Well, how have you seen the tension of the recognition and actually surrendering to and living out true identity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's taking those values and then just being able, it's one thing to take an assessment. I've had friends that are like, oh, I've done a core values exercise before. They took some tests. The test gave them a sheet that said, here's your values. And then that sheet went directly into a file or a folder and has never been pulled out again.
Sure.
Right. Being able to go a lot deeper than that, where you are able to say, well, if faith is my number one value, which is, certainly is for me, what does that mean to me? Right. And like, how does that then get brought into my role as a dad, my role in the business that I run. And so giving it a practical application, one, the research on it is phenomenal. Like, we know that when people do simple daily things that affirm their values and that give their values a direction in their day-to-day plans and activities, it creates an internal narrative of what therapists call self-adequacy. They use lame terms. Who wants to be self-adequate, right? But it means like self-effective, right? It means that they believe they can overcome their circumstances. And there's something amazing that happens when you start to believe, even if I'm in really difficult circumstances, I think I can overcome this. But you put Jesus at the center of that, right? Knowing that you've got an omnipotent, all-powerful God. All of a sudden you see people digging in deeper, right? You see them persisting, being more resilient. Make sure I come back to the question here.
No, you're on the right path.
Okay, good. So I think it's just the depth, right? I think it's the depth in being able to, there's lots of amazing biblical passages that give us a sense of what our identity is in Christ. But those things are, I will say, a little generic, right? They're just things that are true for all of us. And not to say that they don't have incredible power. They 100% do. But where I've seen, I think, a challenge is, well, how do I personalize that, right, to my life, the things that I'm doing? That's where I think being able to go in, we've got, a series of questions that are all around. There's a role crafting exercise that looks at, like, what are the things that you most love to do, the responsibilities, the tasks? What are the types of interactions that you want to have with your kids, right? Your wife? How do you want to make them feel when they're in your presence? What is the mindset or the thought? Like, it's essentially purpose, right? When I'm having this impact in my work, it makes my work feel like it's one of the most important things in the world, right? It makes me feel, and when again, that has a faith component behind it, that's where all of a sudden you see this, your identity in Christ come alive in a really practical, powerful way.
And then you hit the flow state.
And then you hit the flow state. I tell you, spiritual flow state.
Oh, supercharged.
Yeah.
Well, then there's Holy Spirit, and you're just lit up.
Yeah.
That's like super flow
It's
state.
like miraculous.
I'm
stuff.
gonna start using the term flow state a lot more often because it just feels right.
It flows.
It flows. It does. I think one thing that is kind of interesting that you talked about that I see so often in men and this compartmentalization that we do, and I think it starts honestly at an elementary age of we act differently at school than we do at home.
Yep.
We act differently with our siblings than we do mom and dad,
Yeah.
and vice versa. I constantly tell my kids, hey, I don't think you would talk to your teacher like that.
Yep.
I don't think that you would behave that way at school. And I use that as a checks and balances system.
Yep.
Would you respond to the principal that way? Would you respond to your teacher that way? And how come I keep getting these incredible reports of you being so kind, so considerate, so caring at school, but I'm just not seeing that at home? Now, I would much rather my kids act that way at school,
Yeah.
and actually cause more trouble for my wife and I at home. I think there's something to do with this. I'm sure you have the right medical terms, therapy terms for they probably feel safer at home,
Right.
or they feel safe to be more reactive and responsive and not necessarily the right way. But
For sure.
anyway, the point is compartmentalization. It starts at a young age, but it doesn't necessarily stop when we become grown adults.
Yep.
And I see it, are you the man that you showed up at church on Sunday, on Monday through Friday at
Yep.
work? And I often ask the question, hey, if I asked your employer or if I asked your employees if they knew you were a Christian, what would they say? So I'd love for you to talk about compartmentalization.
That's such a great question. And I laugh about the conversation at home with the kids.
Oh,
That
yeah.
literally could have been the conversation I had with my son like yesterday. So yeah, I absolutely agree that there is this compartmentalization that starts at a young age. And I do think it starts with, when you feel safe with someone, you let your guard down. And so there's a sense of not needing to show up. I was at a conference one time and I just asked, there's about 150 people in the audience, and said, who gets the best of you? And so, show of hands at work, does work get the best of you? I was like, I think all 150 hands went up. And on some level, I'm sure we all get it, that at work, like that's what's responsible for helping us to pay the bills. And so we feel like we need to show up. And a lot of times we burn a lot of bandwidth, right? And trying to hold back things that maybe we might want to say, right? Or containing our emotions. And so by the time that we get home too, there's a sense of feeling burnt out. Like we know that a kid is most likely to act out and have tantrums like right after school because they've wasted all of their self-discipline and willpower right at school. And so now they're ready to like full on meltdown. Not particularly great for parents.
No.
But like, I think there's obviously a way to maintain a holistic sense of who you are, where you're not burning through as much self-discipline, right? That you're just able to operate kind of knowing, from a moral sense. I love, there was a research on the best predictor of happiness, and it was a massive, massive study. It had like 35,000 people that were surveyed on this, and they were looking at personal characteristics, right? Is it optimism? Is it emotional intelligence? And the researchers were surprised to find that autonomy was the best predictor of long-term sustainable happiness, right? People who were happy over a long period of time. But autonomy is another one of those words, like, what does that mean, right? I know a lot of people that come in and say that freedom, independence, autonomy is their number one core value, but the way they live it out is in this rebellious, you can't tell me what to do, right, type of way. That's not really autonomy. One of the best definitions of autonomy, oddly enough, that I've seen came from the Merriam Online Dictionary. And it said that it was self-governed choice with moral agency, right? So it needed both of those things. So when we're making decisions that we freely choose, right? This is important to me, but it reminds me of Viktor Frankl, right? For anyone who hasn't read Man's Search for Meaning, like one of the greatest books that I've ever read, not a very light read. So, but here's a guy who was in 5 Nazi concentration camps. His wife was killed, his parents were killed, he was tortured, starved, and yet in the midst of all that, he was able to continue to choose his attitude, right? He found meaning in choice. And that gave him freedom that they couldn't take from him, despite their best efforts. And so the ability to continue to affirm our inherent to choose Jesus, right? Even in the midst of significant trials and adversity, even when everything externally is going wrong,
right?
When we continue to choose to do the virtuous thing, we continue to choose the Jesus pathway. There is unlimited freedom and growth in that. And that's really, really powerful.
So good. Man, this has been an incredible conversation, and I want to take a few moments for you to just self-promotion on all the different things you got going on for our listeners, because you have several different types of things that you are working on that are very helpful and are really changing lives. So share a little bit more of all the different things you got going.
Appreciate that. I think if someone's looking to get more information, probably the best place to go is to my website at ag-thrive.com. And on there you can find the True North Movement podcast under the resources, where you can hear Eric Hurd and I talk about how men deal with emotions, right? Not something that we always have been taught or deal with particularly well, and the need for a tribe, which is why everything you're doing here is so critical, right? And this is such a powerful movement that you're creating here. We are, Eric and I, going to start leading boot camps. So offering on the weekends. I think we got one already set up that filled up. Like, we just mentioned it in passing, and then we're like, I'm in, right? Like, book my spot. So we filled up 25 spots like that.
Wow.
So we plan on doing those. I think the plan right now is to do one per quarter, and to offer kind of a full day intensive of really diving in, defining the true north, but then creating radically resilient practices that you can apply immediately and see real-time results in, right? So that people start to then lead in more resilient ways. So that's one thing that we'd love for people to come and get involved with. Again, if we could help more men to start to operate with clarity in who they are, and then leading in resilient ways, I mean, that to me would be the flow state and the greatest impact I could have.
Oh man, so awesome. So make sure you check out his website. We'll add the link in, as well as his True North podcast with Eric Hurd is great. And thanks for being on with Justin and I in Conversations in the Wild.
This is awesome. And go check out the Western Bacon Cheeseburger.
Yeah,
right?
go check out. It's amazing. Carl's Jr. for those of you who are in Southern California. Although, are they outside of Southern California?
So you might know it as Hardee's. Like, if
Hardee's,
you're,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.